For today's lecture, we are going to take a look at chapter 5 of Tagore's My Reminiscences. This chapter is called The Normal School, and here Tagore accounts for his early experiences as a schoolboy. So, at the beginning of the chapter, he tells us of his early experiences at the Oriental Seminary, and then this chapter also talks about the transformation wherein he left the Oriental Seminary and joined the normal school for his early schooling. And that's what we're going to look at in today's lecture. And these are going to be mere instances, and they aren't going to have much to be broken down for you. Much of it is self-explanatory, but wherever necessary, I am going to break it down for you wherever necessary. So let's have a look at the first two excerpts. They are related to each other. This is why I have put them both in the same slide. Let's begin with the first one. I could not have been long at the Oriental Seminary, for I was still of tender age when I joined the normal school. The only one of its features which I remember is that before the classes began, all the boys had to sit in a row in the gallery and go through some kind of singing or chanting of verses, evidently an attempt at introducing an element of cheerfulness into the daily routine. Now, of course, many of you will recognize that this is a tradition in many schools where, in fact, it remains a tradition today that before the classes start, there is a sort of prayer with which the day begins in the school, and following the prayer, classes are held, right? So Tagore is narrating a similar incident. Now, obviously, these things were new at the time, and hence the language in which he describes it is from the perspective of a child, right? For example, he describes it as singing or chanting. If if it is seen from today's perspective, when a lot of people are aware of how several schools have, prayers before the classes start, you will be able to easily recognize that what Tagore is talking about is the prayer that is often performed by students of the school, by all the students of the school, preferably before classes begin, right? So that is what he is talking about here. Then he says, unfortunately, the words were English and the tune quite as foreign, so that we had not the faintest notion what sort of incantation we were practicing. Neither did the meaningless monotony of the performance tend to make us cheerful. This failed to disturb the serene self-satisfaction of the school authorities at having provided such a treat. They seemed they deemed it superfluous to inquire into the practical effect of their bounty. They would probably have counted it a crime for the boys not to be dutifully happy. Anyhow, they rested content with taking the song as they found it. Right? So, what Tagore does is once again a critique of his early schooling, right? And this is an account of his experience of monotony at school. Because as you must have understood, he says that we were made to sing those songs, chant those verses, and we did not have the faintest idea of what these incantations or songs or chants were about. And he points out that these songs that they were made to sing were in English and the tune was foreign. And if you read the chapter, I have not quoted everything from the chapter here. If you read the chapter, Tagore tries to tell us from memory what this song must have been, right? And as is the case with memory, Tagore himself confesses that I do not exactly remember what it was. And he also tells us that since the words were in English and the tune was foreign, it was not possible for me or anyone else in my class to accurately deduce what the words were, right? So if you read the chapter, you'll find Tagore tells us what he remembers of this chant or song, and what comes off is something that does not make sense in any language, whether it's Bengali or English, right? And then Tagore tells us that it has taken me years to figure out what this chant must have been. And then he says, then he gives us, you know, he tries to tell us what the real verse or the actual verse must have been, right? So for that, read the chapter and find out what went in between, what this chant was, and how Tagore interpreted it, and what memory of that chant he had. However, having said that, let's now again look at the quotation. So he says, unfortunately, the words were in English and the tune was foreign, and naturally, the students did not have the slightest inkling of what the incantation was about, right? And at the beginning, in the first excerpt, he says that this was probably, for introducing an element of cheerfulness into the daily routine. But then, since they did not understand the words, did not even, identify with the tune, that aim at making the students cheerful didn't simply work. It did not really do that in real life. It may have intended to cheer up the students, but that really didn't have any effect. However, despite the songs having no effect on the students, not really, introducing an element of cheerfulness into the daily routine, the school authorities nonetheless felt they were doing a great thing, right? They were of the opinion that by making these children sing English songs which they don't even understand, words they can't even pronounce. In fact, uh, far from it, right? They can't even differentiate between the words. They don't even know where one word begins and the other ends. So, due to all of these things, the students, as far the students are concerned, the songs did not make any sense to them. But the school authorities were not disturbed by this. The school authorities were, in a sense of, they were dwelling in a sense of self-satisfaction at having provided this, what Tagore calls no less than a treat, right? And these school authorities, they did not encourage students to, question uh, what these songs meant, or what the reasons were that they were made to sing. In fact, they did not even make an attempt to ensure that the students properly understood what they were made to sing. And they did not have any concern whatsoever to inquire into the practical effect of this cheerfulness exercise, right? So what was deemed as a way to introduce element of cheerfulness into the routine did not really work, and the school authorities did not really bother to inquire into its practical effects either. And Tagore also points out that they would probably have counted it a crime, and they refers to the school authorities. So the school authorities counted it a crime for the boys not to be happy. So if you were singing the song and you did not appear happy, it was your fault. It was the student's fault, you see, right? So for these reasons, Tagore's early experience of school was not very pleasant, right? And finally, he ends, anyhow, the rest had content with taking the song as they found it. Right? So, in the end, the students also accepted it, and the school authorities were simply happy to have introduced an element of English culture or English song into the daily routine, and they wished that the students would be cheerful and really did not bother with the effects of um, such such songs being introduced into the curriculum. Okay, now the second excerpt is to a great extent about Tagore's wish to get away from school. So, in the previous excerpts, you have already seen that school is not really very pleasant for him. If you remember, in one of the early chapters, he had spoken about the punishment given in school, right? Where the students were made to stand on a bench with their hands flinging up in the air with inverted palms and slits put on them. So you remember that Tagore is very critical of these things. He's very critical of that punishment. He's also very critical of the fact that students are being made to sing songs they don't understand in a language they are not familiar with. So overall, it seems that Tagore does wish to get away from school, and in this excerpt, that will become clearer. This feeling of his. He says, as my memories of the normal school emerge from haziness and become clearer, they are not the least sweet in any particular. So essentially, he does not have any good memories from his days at school. Had I been able to associate with the other boys, the woes of learning might not have seemed so intolerable. But that turned out to be impossible. So nasty were most of the boys in their manners and habits. So he said that, well, if I could associate with the other boys, maybe this monotony, maybe my dislike for school would have reduced. But because of the behavior of the other boys, that became impossible. So what did he do? What was his solution? He says, in the interval of the classes, I would go up to the second story and while away the time sitting near a window overlooking the street. I would count 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, wondering how many such would have to be got through like this. So as you can see, he was not really happy with school for many reasons. He's critical of the punishment. He's critical of how school begins with the forced exercise of cheerfulness. He's utterly dissatisfied with his classmates because they are nasty. Their manners are bad. He does not like their habits. So he's left alone. And in the interval of classes, he finds a spot for himself, totally without any friend. And in that place, in the second story of the school, he sits near a window, stares at the streets, and counts 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. So essentially, he's saying that he's been in this school in the same way for at least 3 years, always wondering when he could get away from the school. Uh, Finally, let's come to his experience as a student, as a pupil, rather, to be more specific. So here he says that of the teachers, I remember only one, of the teachers in normal school, obviously, whose language was so foul that, out of sheer contempt for him, I steadily refused to answer any one of his questions. Thus, I sat silent throughout the year at the bottom of his class, and while the rest of the class was busy, I would be left alone to attempt the solution to many an intricate problem. Right? So he is essentially saying that while the rest of the class was busy attending the class, I did not really attend this class because I did not like the teacher. I did not even, just for sheer contempt for him, I did not even answer any of his questions. So he would ultimately be left alone, and he would sit at the end of the class, bottom of the class, and when he says that left alone to attempt the solution of many an intricate problem, he's essentially saying that I was left to myself, thinking my own thoughts away from the class. He was not even in the class, so to speak, right? And what these intricate problems were, you have quite a few examples in the chapter itself, right? So I'm not going into any further detail. Finally, he talks about, after having spoken about this foul mouthed teacher, he also speaks about an instance of examinations. So, essentially, in this chapter, he covers several aspects: his dislike for school, monotony of school, his dislike for his classmates, his contempt for certain teachers, and finally, about the examination process. Okay, let's see what happens here. When at length a year of that class had passed, we were examined in Bengali by Pandit Madhusudan Vachashpati. I got the largest number of marks of all the boys. The teacher complained to the school authorities that there had been favoritism in my case. So I was examined a second time, and the superintendent of the school seated, with the superintendent of the school seated beside the examiner. This time also I got a top place. So you see, this teacher seems to have had a specific dislike for Tagore, due to which this suspicion arose in the first place, right? So it's pretty much self-explanatory, this paragraph, where Tagore sat for an exam, got the highest number of marks, and the teacher complained of favoritism, and Tagore had to repeat that exam, with the result being the same. He was at the top place at first. He continued to be first in class even after he was examined the second time. So overall, this chapter, the normal school, covers several of Tagore's experiences at the normal school, and overall, as you can surely see, um, Tagore is not very happy about remembering his experiences at school. uh, and during while he experienced it, it was mostly an experience of contempt, right, and dislike. So that ends chapter 5 of Tagore's My Reminiscences.